And the topic of today's session is inspiration. So when we think of inspiration, most of the time, what we think of is the big idea, right? The flash. And we've all seen the little cartoons with the little light bulb going off over somebody's head. And it's like, oh, I'm inspired. I have an idea. I'm going to go and do something. But the vast majority of the time, inspiration doesn't work that way. It's actually lots and lots of little stuff. Excuse me. And we have to learn how to see that little stuff and to recognize it for what it is, inspiration, because we're expecting all this big fancy things and it doesn't come to us very often. And that's the problem. We don't recognize real inspiration when we see it. So the little stuff is important because that's what the world is actually made up of, sorry. So it's all this little stuff, all these little details, and they're all around us, but because we see them all the time, they just become mundane. And it's just like, well, you know, I've seen that, and our eyes just sort of glaze over it, and we don't remember it. It doesn't stick with us. And so because of that, we can't use any of those little details that are in our lives. We just ignore all of these things. And this is unfortunate because this is the true root of inspiration, all that little stuff. Everyone wants the big, fast success, right? They want to have the big project, the big flashy thing. They want to do it and they want to make lots of money. They want it to be big and colorful and beautiful and amazing. But that's not how the world works, right? It's all these little things. It's small little steps, which is what I'm trying to do when I guide you through this process in this series, but also recognizing that everything that we do is built up of smaller parts. And so we have to learn to recognize the small. So creatives who have a practice, if they have a daily practice, and I like using that word, you see it a lot more now. Artists who say, you know, I have my practice. I think that's a good word because it's important to recognize that's what they're doing. They are practicing. So these creatives who work at their craft all of the time use inspiration differently than most people who are thinking of inspiration in that big, flashy sort of way. So they see inspiration as a stepping off point. So maybe they'll look at something, recognize it, have an idea, and then they use that thing to go off and do something else. So they start with those little details and they go on from there. And this is what scientists do. And a lot of people don't think of scientists as creative, scientists and engineers, but what they're trained to do is actually recognize all those little details and all those little facts and start asking questions about those things. And then think about, well, what can I do with that? That's what a scientist is trained to do. It's not that they're trained to memorize a whole body of information. That's part of it. But then it's you get all of that stuff and then you do something with it. So the key to inspiration is looking at everything around you and then using it to do something else, right? So those who are unfamiliar with practice as a creative person, they work at things differently. They see something, maybe it's really pretty or it's, you know, really interesting, and they want to do that. They want to make that. They want to have that. And so what they'll do is they'll try to copy it. Now, sometimes creative people will work at copying, but for different ends. And the problem with most people when they're starting out, they see that big flashy thing, they want it, they start copying it, but then they're not able to achieve the results that they think they should be able to get. And so they get frustrated and maybe they get angry and then they stop and they say, oh, this is hard, I can't do it, right? The problem is they're going from big inspiration to big project. And it's just really difficult to do. You have to start small and go from there. So most creative people, they keep and make scrapbooks of some kind. I have a variety of them. I use different kinds for different purposes. And these are just places where I keep little details that are interesting to me. And I've been collecting things for years. So one of the things that I do, since I'm making art dolls and I'm clothing them in things, is I have for years been keeping these notebooks with textures and different kinds of clothes and all kinds of things. And so this is a scrapbook. This is stuff that I have clipped from other sources, or maybe I'll make a Xerox copy and put it in here. And then this is a set of little details. For me, this is a collection of details. I'm not looking at the whole jacket and saying, oh, I want to copy that. I look at, oh, I really like those buttonholes. Or isn't it interesting how the cuffs get narrow? Or I like the lace that's right over there. Or that color next to that color is really cool. So for me, it's just a collection, a big notebook full of details. And over the years, I can go back and I can look at these images and I can use them in completely different ways over time. So one day, maybe it's a collar that looks interesting to me. Maybe next month, it'll be a particular color or texture of fabric. So for me, it's those little things that are important. Okay? So you can also use sketchbooks and notebooks, and these are even better than having a scrapbook. And the reason that so many artists have sketchbooks, and I sketch in pencils, you can't really see too much of this. For me, what I do is I go in my notebook and I'm looking at all of those little ideas, and then I will sketch something. And I don't know if you can see very much here. And they're just kind of light details, but for me, that's all I need. This is where I am processing all of those little things into something else. So I'm not looking at somebody else's art doll or some other animal, looking at the totality of it and saying, oh, I want to copy all of that. I look at little things and say, oh, I like that, or that contrast, or that texture. And then I go into my collection of notebooks and I'm like, oh, what appeals to me? And sometimes things that appeal to me don't have anything to do with the original big picture. And so then I'll put them together. I process them in my mind in my sketchbook. Now, one of the things that you're doing as your homework is you are writing. You're actually using your hands and your mind to just make images, which is why a sketchbook like this is so useful, because that work of processing something with your mind is so incredibly useful to making it think up new ideas and move somewhere else. So sketchbooks are great. You know, a lot of people these days have Pinterest or Instagram, right? And so we're flipping through and we're going through our screen and we're looking at all of these images. And maybe you have a whole bunch of boards where you collect all kinds of ideas on Pinterest. I do. Maybe you have Instagram and you're following 2,000 people. I don't follow that many, just a few. But, you know, we're going through and we're looking at stuff. And the thing is that all of this stuff that's online on these kinds of feeds are unrealistic. They're all of those big inspirations. And the reason that we like them is because they're colorful, they're bright, they're shiny, they're fancy, they're big, they're organized, they're really neat, they're really pretty, they're exceptionally beautiful. But not everything in life is like that. So they're meant to catch our attention. And we're like, wow, I like that. You know, heart, 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 heart. So you like those things, but it's not a useful source of inspiration. Because what do? You see this big, beautiful thing. Somebody's redone their kitchen in this marvelous way. And so everybody's like, oh, I want to do my kitchen just like that. So you start the process and then you get frustrated and it's like, oh my gosh, this takes so much time and I can't do this. I can't find all the jars that she had. And where did she get that paint color? And I cannot find the antique stools that she's using under her kitchen island. It's like crazy. So when you start with that big thing and you try to replicate it, it's a really good path to frustration and anger and disappointment. And it's not a good way to start if you're just beginning the path of creativity. So what you want to do is you want to start small. Sometimes when you're starting with all those big ideas, you see something and you really, really, really want it. And you're like, oh gosh, I think I can do that. And maybe you can, quite a number of times you can do that. But the problem is we also feel paralyzed because the project looks so big, right? Or maybe it's just something like learning how to draw, or learning how to paint, or learning how to sing. And you hear somebody who has a beautiful voice. So you see somebody who paints amazing portraits, and you're, gosh, I could never get there. I could never do that. The problem is you're comparing your lack of skill and knowledge at this point in time to somebody who's been working at their craft for perhaps decades, right? So when you're standing there at the beginning, you feel paralyzed. You don't know where to start. And the thing is, you have to start small. You start simple, right? So what inspires you? You hear that kind of question all the time, and people say, oh, nature, or Picasso, or Mozart. These are all of those big ideas again. And it's not particularly useful. How many people say, oh, you know, it's the plaster on my wall, or I'm really inspired by old plastic bags? Or how many times have you heard somebody say, you know what, the wrinkle on my elbow is just fascinating? You know, those sorts of things are part of our everyday lives. They're little details. And for an artist, they catch your attention, right? You're looking at the texture on the plaster on the wall. I'm actually looking at the plaster on my wall. And I don't know if I have an interesting wrinkle on my elbow, but those small things are part of everybody's daily life. And our daily lives are made up of all of those tiny, tiny things. And a whole day is all of those tiny, tiny things. So you need to learn to notice the little things, because those are important. Most people don't notice the little things. We are conditioned to notice the big flashy thing, the big ideas, the big fancy stuff on Instagram or Pinterest. But we're not conditioned to notice our neighbor's wrinkled elbows, unless they're really, really strange or unusual for some way. And then we're like, whoa, what's going on with his elbows, right? But if it's just like everybody else's elbow, it's just like, well, you don't notice it. Your eyes just go right over it. But you have to train yourself to recognize those things. If you're not recognizing those little things, you're not making room for real inspiration. And if you're not doing that, you're not making room, place in your mind for ideas to form, because it's all of those little things that you're putting together to make something new. So for homework number 3, what we're going to do is use the same materials we've used for sessions 1 and 2. So if you're using paper and a writing implement, it's going to be the same thing, just a simple piece of paper. But this time I want you to use 2 or more colors or textures of writing implement. So you can use different kinds of pens, markers, whatever. 2 or more colors and kinds of writing implement. It doesn't matter what it is, okay? So piece of paper and multiple colors and or kinds of writing implement. If you're using cloth and needle and some kind of thread or yarn, just use the same scrap of cloth or something different, whatever comes to hand. And I want you to use 2 or more colors of thread or yarn or whatever it is. Okay, so this time what we're going for is different colors. Now what I want you to do is go back to the photo albums for sessions 1 and 2 and look at the different boxes with lines and curves that I have posted and other people have posted. Not too many people have posted, so post your homework. And I want you to copy somebody else's boxes of lines and curves. So you are using somebody else's simple little drawing to make something of your own that's new. And so you're using different colors and perhaps textures of writing or making marks, okay? So that is your homework. I want you to start with the electrocution spirals, my favorite thing, Lynda Barry's electrocution spirals. And what I want you to do is, while you're doing them, and you're going to be doing 4 different ones, remember you're alternating hands, I want you to recite the ABCs backwards as you do it. And part of this is learning how to feel what you're writing and where your mind is when you're doing something unusual. So you may be thinking, yet again, man, this is stupid. I can't believe she's making me do this. It's important, okay? Don't just listen to what I'm saying. Try the exercises. They're different and they get you used to feeling that kind of different thing, and learn to be creative and make room for ideas from that place of difference. Okay? So we're doing 3 different things with these exercises. You're getting in the habit of doing something every day. And this shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. Just do your spirals and then do some of those squares using somebody else's images as an inspiration. That's it, just 15 minutes a day. Okay? You're also practicing working with your hands, because making marks with your hands, whether you're stitching or drawing, is using your eyes and your brain and your body in a very unique way. So you need to practice that every day. Even simple stuff like this is very important. And you're also learning what being creative feels like. Okay, so you need that habit, you need to feel it, and you need to recognize how you're feeling when you're doing it. Okay, so I will see you tomorrow for session 4. Until then, practice, practice, do your homework. See you then. Bye-bye.